We are back and today we will be finishing the final parts of the RX-78-Z'Gok. We will finish up the main mobile suit and then make an awesome base to display it on. I decided not to film the remaining parts that had to be painted since the entire process was identical to what I did in the previous episodes, so if you want to know how I painted these parts, check those episodes out. The final assembly consists out of the legs and hip that once assembled will finish the kit off. Now, I really wanted to do a full assembled inner frame without the armor since I put a lot of effort into making it look cool, and I just wanted to see it one last time before hiding it all away under the armor. Unfortunately, as you can see here, one of the armor parts broke when I tried to remove it from the inner frame. Luckily it was along a panel line, so it's almost completely invisible. And just look at that, this looks amazing. I'm really happy with how this kit came out. From the pre-shading and the custom panel lines to the inner frame paint job still shining through, it's just beautiful to look at. Now that the suit is done and looks amazing, it needs to go together with a good looking base. We start with this wooden base that I bought at my local Action, and we will use this sheet of pla plate to cut out a base for the Z'Gok to stand on. After making a trace that will give the Z'Gok enough room to stand on, we cut the general shape with a knife. Once the pla plate is scored, I can snap and cut the plastic away. With this shape I tried to create a floor cutout effect, and it looks cool, but will look even better once we are done with it. I got a bunch of different evergreen styrene profiles and rods to make this base look better, as well as for a upcoming kit bash project. I then used this H-beam to be the foundational support beams to run under the flooring, and I cut off some smaller pieces that I can have extended from underneath the edge of the platform, because there's no reason to just put the entire thing underneath there when it's almost invisible. I then hold them, as well as some tubes, in place with tape to see if they look good. I then take another smaller tube piece that I want to be the cross section to a bigger one, and I heat it with a lighter so I can bend the plastic. This isn't an ideal way, and heating up plastic like this isn't that good of an idea, so be careful when you try this, or just don't try this at all. I then chip the ends of the tube so it looks like it was damaged. Once it all looks good, I glue the H-beams with cement and the tubes with super glue. I also got some smaller rods that will look like rebar. I also made some stencils for the Earth Federation logo. I printed these in 3 different sizes on my Bamboo P1S, and I will be using these as a stencil to cut out the logo out of the middle of the floor. I tried all 3 sizes with the suit on top to see whichever one fits best to the scale, and I decided to go with the middle size one. And I'll put these files online, link in the description below for you guys. I'll use 2 drops of super glue to fix the template to the base, and then use my DSPIA scriber to cut away the plastic until the piece comes out. I then send a acrylic sheet to create a diffused effect that will in turn diffuse the lights that I will be putting underneath this logo. I got a box of lights on Amazon along with some extra AA batteries and a battery holder. I then glue that centered piece of acrylic sheet behind the cutout with some super glue, and then measure another sheet of roughly the same size, and I'll be using this as the plate to hold the lighting together. And after this awful soldering job that I won't hurt your eyes with any longer, we move on to creating a box frame that we can use to mount it to the back of the platform. And for that I'll use some strips of pla plate that I fixed to the acrylic sheets with some UV resin. I will be using a lot of UV resin to fix things together in this video, and it works, but it's far from ideal, but it's quick and not that messy. Super glue would have worked as well, and probably was the better option to go with, but oh well. With some black 3.0, I paint the inside of the box to prevent as much light leak as I can. I don't really know if it helped, and the lights weren't strong to begin with anyway, but it worked in the end, so it's good, I think. Once that is mounted to the platform, I add a plate of plastic to the back of this battery holder to make it fit in the rails that I'll make to mount it on the platform, so there are no external wires running out of the wooden base to a separate battery station, and I can still access it to replace the batteries. After that, I mounted some brass rods to the light box and drilled some holes I can fit them in so I can mount this whole platform to the base. And after that, I cut out and drill out a hole for the switch to go in. Before we move on to painting, however, we will glue another box around the wires and such to hide them from view. We then drill another hole to route the wires from the battery pack to the switch. I use a round grinding bit for the Dremel to make a channel for the wire so it's flush with the bottom, but then I ended up deepening this out with a drill bit and using that to grind it out. Once the final wires are soldered together and we made sure everything still works, we move on to decorating the box a little bit. We do this by adding a bunch of tubes to hide the ugly blob of UV resin that I used. We bend one tube around one corner, and from another tube we cut out a quarter of it so it wraps around the edges, which I just didn't feel like risking falling apart by sanding it because the UV bond is quite weak. And then use a stencil again, with which I made the hole, to make a perfectly fitting mask to prevent the paint from getting onto the acrylic sheet. Now be sure to use a fresh and sharp hobby blade to make clean sharp cuts and get the best looking mask you can. After I carefully and painfully put the mask on, I used some Mr. Surfacer 500 and a stiff brush to dab a rust-like texture on both the beams and tubes. This will in a bit get the rust paint job we will do look a bit better. Now for the main paint job, I go my usual route, which consists of a black prime base, followed with some white pre-shading, finished with a white paint coat. By doing this, I create a shading effect to make the floor look less uniform and more used. If you want to see this in action, check out any of my recent videos, as I almost always do this for any scale model that I make. I also painted the H-beams, a steel color from the AK Extreme Metal line, which is still my favorite airbrush metal paint to date. After looking at some reference material for rust paint jobs, I start with a base layer of Dongle Grau. Old rust will be used for the dark rust effect. I will build the rust effect by using a dark rust paint in the middle of the rust parts, as this is the oldest rust there is, and move to a lighter colors on the outside of the rust patch to show the natural aging of the rust. Now I do want to clarify that I have no clue if this is how rust actually behaves, so then take my word for it, and that's a solid piece of advice. Oh, and I use a piece of sponge to stipple the paint instead of just using a brush. This creates a bit more of a random effect, and I think it seals the deal. I think it looks pretty good, but to unify this a bit more, I'll use Tamiya brown panel liner as a wash over the entirety of the steel parts. After painting the surface tube red, I removed the masking tape for the emblem, as I do want the matte coat to be painted on this to further diffuse the light. After matte coat is on, I can remove the remaining masking tape from underneath and put it all together. We route the wires from the battery through the hole and connect them to the switch simply by twisting the wires. I couldn't be bothered to take out a soldering iron again. And the switch, of course, will just be glued in place with some super glue. We then tape the wires off so it can sit flush on a desk and insert the batteries. One final check to see if everything works, and we are done. Thank you so much for sticking around. This was a rather long process, but since I split my Gunpla builds into multiple parts to prevent burnout, it took a while, but we've made it, and I'm really happy with the end result. For more photos on the final build, check out my Instagram in the description below, and I'll see you guys next time.